Okay, well, welcome after the break, and we're going to continue the question that we were asked by Claire a couple of months ago when I had given you all the instructions on how to find the different settings in your camera and what your aperture did and what your shutter speed did and what your ISO did. She highlighted that that was all very well, but when she was standing there with a camera in her hand, how did you go about making the decisions? What actually influenced it? And so on thinking of that, I thought, well, it doesn't happen right at the point when you're in front of the scene. You actually have had to do your thinking prior to that. And so we've explored the concept of having a vision of what you would like to be able to take and how you go about researching that vision and how you go about recording it. And I highlighted that I use the app OneNote to just record all my ideas, take photographs of other images, whether they're paintings or other photographers' work, to give me inspiration for when I'm actually at the spot that I want to shoot. And then in the last session, we walked through all of the logistics of planning a shoot, because once you've got your vision, you need to know what sort of similar location that you would want, what lighting, and the lighting's all about time of day and time of year, what you would have to organise in order to get security access or people there or whatever's required for you to do that shoot, what equipment you need to take, whether you need to take lights, whether you need to take headlamps because you're doing it during after sunset or before sunset, at sunrise, whether you'd need flashes with you. Do you need anyone to help? Do you need to be on a ladder? Do you need someone to hold that ladder? Do you need someone to keep people away, help with the props and the models? All of those things you need to think about in advance. And again, I record all of those things in OneNote. So we've now got to the point that we've got the vision, we've got our equipment list, and we're actually standing there with our camera, and we're going to make the decisions about what settings we put in the camera. So we're going to review today how we actually shoot based on the vision we've got. So I always have in my OneNote on my iPad the photographs that have inspired me. So on the day, I've got a really clear idea of how I'm going to shoot this. I've got everything set up. If I recognise I'm going to need a tripod, I've got that. If I need a ladder for the point of view that I want, I've set all that up. And now I'm up to step 3, where I need to select the lens that goes on the camera and then select the appropriate focal length. Am I going to, if I've got a zoom, am I going to shoot it at 100 or am I going to shoot it at 24? Which one I'm going to use? My exposure mode, am I going to use aperture priority, shutter priority, manual mode, automatic? My exposure settings, ISO, aperture and shutter speed. Then I'm going to compose the frame of how I want it, the subject in it to look. I'm going to set my focal point of what I need to be in focus, and then I'm going to press the button. So that's what we're going to go through now. I'm going to give you an example of a shoot that I did last year, where I was on a trip to the west coast of Tasmania, and on the agenda, the trip itinerary, they said that we were going to visit the Table Cape tulip farm, and we just happened to be there during the time that was in flower. So it was absolutely, a wonderful opportunity for us to have a photograph. So what I did was got onto the internet to see, how do people shoot tulip farms? What are other people's ideas? And it's not so much that you're copying people, but you're trying to get inspiration of what is the best point of view. And particularly if you're on a camera group trip like I was, you only get the time allocated that they've given you. You don't have any freedom to muck around. You need to know exactly the sort of shots that you need to take before you get there. So that one up on the right-hand side, not a terribly inspiring photo, but I liked the fact that they had used those leading lines to go into the horizon. And I thought, well, if I've got a similar position, I'll see if I can utilize that idea. So that was my vision. It's a classic documentary style that you would see in a brochure. The wide vista with the leading lines of coloured tulips. There was sharp foreground detail and a large depth of field. So right through the image, it was, reasonably in focus, and it included some sky in the background to give it context and also to provide those complementary colours against the tulips. So that's my vision. So I've got to choose the appropriate lens length, and that idea of those leading lines and that distortion of them all going into a perspective point in the background, you always need a wide angle lens to do that. Wide angle lens give you that distortion, and that's what I wanted. If I'd used a long lens, it minimizes that distortion. So I wanted a wide angle lens, and I did have a wide angle on me, but I love my prime 17mm tilt shift lens. It's as sharp as a tack, and it's just such a beautiful lens, and I rarely carry it around with me. And so I thought, well, I'm really going to optimize that lens, and so I chose that one to put on the camera. So now I need to think about my exposure mode. Now, personally, I never think about my exposure mode. I've always got my camera on manual. I rarely ever take it off manual. In fact, I can't even remember the last time I did, because the next steps require you to have your camera in manual, because you've really got to think through how you're going to shoot this to get the absolute optimum of sharp all the way through. It was a really windy day. The Table Cape, where these tulip farms are up the northwest of Tasmania, on a peninsula, high up on a cape, right out in Bass Strait. The wind, unbelievable. So you're nearly being blown away up there. So shutter speed is absolutely critical to a sharp photo. So I know I need to optimize that. So I would highly recommend you always shoot on manual, because if you're going to go through these steps and not have to go through them over and over and over again, shoot on manual and get it right the first time. So the first aperture, or the first exposure setting that I set, is my ISO. And I always start with the lowest ISO, unless I'm going for some creative mode of wanting to have it really, really grainy. I start with 100, or if I immediately know, look, there's no way known I'm going to get the amount of light I want, I'll start at 200 or 400. So, beautiful sunny day, I'll start at low ISO, and I set my ISO at 100. So that's the first step. The second step is to set your aperture. Now, this comes from your creative vision. If your creative vision is to be sharp all the way through, then you need a large depth of field, and a reasonably large depth of field, which is what I wanted for the tulips. I figured with my 17mm lens, I could get that between f8 and f13. But because I needed a really high shutter speed, I recognised that I'll try and get the most light I can get in the camera, hoping I will get that depth of field. So I started off with f8 and thought, well, if I can't get the depth of field I want, I can always go up. But this allows me to get the most light for that high shutter speed I'm going to need. So the next step was the high shutter speed, and trying to work out with the wind what I would need. So I sort of opted for 3/20th of a second and thought, well, I'll try that, see if I can minimize my blur. And because the 17mm lens, I could have gone down to a 15th of a second, because the slowest shutter speed you can have handheld is always the inverse of your lens. So I could have gone down to a 15th of a second, but not in that wind. So I had to make sure that I had something reasonably sharp. So when I got to 1/32nd of a second and my shutter speed, I looked at my exposure meter. You know, you've got on your camera this scale here, and it was showing that it was slightly underexposed. So I go back round the circle again, and I just up my ISO to 200th. And when I upped my ISO, I got the camera saying that everything was well exposed. So that the arrow in the camera is pointing to 0, and it showed me that my ISO of 200 was enough, with a aperture of 8, shutter speed of 3/20th per second, and now I've set my ISO. So the next step is to compose it. And, you know, what I want to do was try and get down low, to try and get this line all the way through the tulips. So it meant that, and my tilt shift, I don't know whether any of you ever used a tilt shift lens, it allows you to get down low without getting down too low, which the older you get, that's quite useful. So I also thought about having a central row of flowers. I wanted to sort of get behind a central row of flowers and have it run right through the image. We never put our horizon midway through, not unless you've got a really symmetrical reflection or something. It's a very unusual position. I always start with the horizon either a third of the way from the top or a third of the way from the bottom. So I've positioned my horizon, and when you've got you're taking a landscape with a large depth of field, you put your focal point a third of the way into the image. So in an image like this, you would just move your focal point to a third of the way in, and that gives you sharpness all the way through to the back, and then sharpness to the front. You don't focus on the front flowers, because where you shift your focal point, you get it sharp before a third and then sharp 2/3 back. So my decision for my focal point was a third of the way in. So my overall exposure decision at this point was ISO 200, which I had to set in order to get enough light in. F8, because I thought I would be able, with my 17mm lens, get it sharp enough just for the distance of the tulip fields to the trees, and my shutter speed of a 320th of a second to try and minimize the wave of the flowers. So this shot was the one that I got, and I quite enjoyed it. I thought it was a nice shot, and it gave me what I needed. But when I really looked at it and blew it up, there was not quite as sharp in the background as I would have liked. And, you know, I felt I could still see a bit of movement blur. So I thought, well, what I can do is actually increase my aperture setting to f13 and see if I can get it sharp all the way through, and also increase my shutter speed if I'm getting some of that blur from the movement. I wasn't sure where I was actually getting it not quite sharp. So when I went through this again, I had to cycle through here, the ISO, aperture and shutter speed, because it didn't quite suit my vision of being sharp all the way through. So this decision-making process is not one and done. It's make your best guess, review it based on what you wanted, and you've always got to know what you wanted, because when you review it, if you don't know what you wanted, you don't know if you got the shot. So review it again, and then recompose the frame and go through it again. So what I wanted was for my aperture to have a larger depth of field, so I increased it from f8 to f13. I wanted to reduce any opportunity for movement blur, so I increased my shutter speed from a 320th per second to a 500th per second. And then I had to check my exposure level again. And when I checked it, it was underexposed because I had reduced the amount of light in the camera two ways. One by increasing my aperture and decreasing the opening, because going from f8 to f13 reduces down the opening to get my larger depth of field, and increasing the shutter speed reduced the amount of time my shutter was open. So I've now reduced the amount of light coming in, so I need to increase my ISO. And again, I increase my ISO until that exposure setting sets to 0, and then I know I'm right. The other thing is I recomposed, because I saw a worker come into the field and I thought, wouldn't it be good to just give some sense of scale by having that worker there? So in this case, I actually set my focal point a little bit further in to make sure that the worker was sharp and that it was sharp all the way through. So it meant you can see I had to shift which of the rows I was actually shooting, so a different colour combination, just so I could get that worker. And I've positioned him sort of high up as part of the leading line so that you would arrive at him by chance. He's certainly not the focal point of this image is those rows, but I wanted him to be like a cookie and to also give scale. So I was happy with that. So I never just shoot one photo. I mean, I've travelled all the way there. I'm in the middle of this tulip farm. What else can I do when I'm here? So I'm going to review my creative vision and see if there's another way that I can shoot this. I've got the settings right, because nothing's going to change with these settings unless I drastically change my creative vision. So in reviewing the one that I took that I quite enjoyed, I love those leading lines. And I thought, well, what about if I actually try it in portrait mode? And this is something that I highly recommend wherever you are. If you had a vision of a landscape and you take it in landscape mode, always rethink it and think, what would it look like in portrait mode? And Dombrowski, who's a famous Dombrowski, the Tasmanian photographer, tend to take most of his photographs in portrait mode, which really made him stand out in his day. He photographed from the 70s, 60s through to about the 80s. He died very young, only in his early 40s. But his photographs are absolutely beautiful if you ever get to see them, his photographs of Tasmania. And I really like the fact he used landscape mode. So probably half of all of my landscape photographs are actually taken in portrait mode, because it gives you quite a different perspective. And so I got down low here, and again using the tilt shift lens, have taken in portrait mode. And I actually prefer the portrait mode one. I think it really allows you to escape into the frame. So I've now got two visions, but I'm still there. So what I wanted to do then was review that creative vision and try something completely different. And so I'd got some ideas before I left, and one of those ideas was to actually try ICM. And so that's what we're going to do next time, is to walk through, going from your absolute classic landscape photograph to try and look at something in fine art. That's a completely different vision. And these were examples of tulip farms that have been taken with intentional camera movement, completely different settings on your camera. So you've always got to be prepared in your equipment list to have these different opportunities to shoot. And so we'll walk through that next time. But for this time, what I want you to do is walk through those steps of having a vision, recording some photographs off the web or magazines or anywhere that you've got that inspiration from, working out what equipment that you would need in order to do that, a location, what time of day that you would need to take it, if you need any extra lighting, do you need any extra props to take that, and then shoot that particular vision and then opt for another vision and shoot it again, even if you're just doing landscape and portrait, or if you're doing up close and further away, whatever you choose to do, see if you can actually proactively start shooting rather than just reactively start shooting, and show us at the next Zoom meeting. So I'll leave you with that homework, and thank you for today's session.